Hello, my name is Sochi Garcia, and today I'm going to talk to you about my inquiry process. So, this is episode 1. I want to tell you how I got started. So, the first thing I did was I applied to the TCICP program for the 2011-2012 school year. And I was accepted into the Accessible Curriculum Spotlight group. So, the second part of my process was actually meeting with my Spotlight group. And if you don't know what a Spotlight group does, it's a group of professionals, teachers, that get together and talk about situations happening in their classroom. So some of the things that we would do is we would have discussions around accessible curriculum. We would read and get familiar with the literature surrounding accessible curriculum, and then we would brainstorm about inquiry questions or just questions we had about things going on in our classroom and ways we could improve our practice. From meeting with my Spotlight group, we were asked to compile observations of our classroom, and one of the first things that I noted from prior data was that I had historically poor performance on the immunity and disease unit in the living environment class. The second thing that I noted was that my students really enjoyed acting and doing games in the classroom, and it's one of the things I noticed in my classroom as well as other teachers. Another thing I noticed was that my students have a very high silly tolerance, and what I mean by that is my students will do just about anything in the classroom that I ask them to. They will put on silly hats, they will run around. So I really wanted to capitalize on the fact that they would do things that normally would be outside of people's comfort zones. Another thing that I noticed about my classroom was that there was very little group cooperation or teamwork. My students prefer to work alone. They don't really enjoy depending on another person to get their work done. So I really wanted to make sure that one of the skills I was building in my class was cooperation and teamwork, especially because they need it inside the laboratory. And then finally, the last thing that I had noticed was that the level of motivation in my classroom was decreasing. And the low point that I was at this point in my observations was in January, and my students had very little motivation in class. And part of that is because at that point, the content gets really heavy and really technical, and they're bogged down by all of this vocabulary in terms of cells and different things like that. So I noticed that I really needed to bring up the level of motivation and general engagement in the class at that point. So from those observations, I formulated my inquiry question. And my first musings, my initial questioning was, how can I go about engaging my students in science? Because I feel like engagement is key to getting them to be lifelong learners in science and really enjoy it. So this was the beginning of my inquiry process.